Hi, everybody. Welcome to the webinar. We're just going to give it about 30 seconds before we get started. Okay, we'll go ahead and start. Welcome, everybody, to today's webinar on faculty strategies for supporting students during COVID-19. We're happy to have you here with us today. I wanted to provide just a brief overview here. This webinar is coming to you today from both Rutgers SHRP, forgotten what decade we're in, Rutgers SHP, Department of Psychiatric Rehabilitation and Counseling Professions in partnership with the Northeastern Caribbean Mental Health Technology Transfer Center, which is the federally funded training and technical assistance center that we have. Just very briefly, the objectives of that center are to enhance the capacity of the behavioral health workforce primarily, as well as other related workforces, to provide evidence-based and promising practice to individuals with mental illnesses and others with mental health conditions. We have a email distribution listserv that we are be happy to have you sign up for so that you can hear about our activities if you would like. We also have, yesterday we had part one of our training that was open to faculty, staff, and students on developing effective strategies for coping with COVID-19. There is a recording of that posted on our website. I did send that link to the Dean's office. Hopefully they will be distributing that, but if you'd like access to it, I can provide it to you directly as well. Part two of that webinar will be on May 7th. In the morning, and so if you haven't, you can register to attend that one as well. I did want to let you know that as part of our grant funding, we have to ask you to complete very brief surveys that provide us some input around what we're providing, but also let the funder know that we have participants and what they think of what we're offering. So you'll receive that in an email after the webinar. I also wanted to let you know that we are recording this and we'll post it on the MHTTC website and have that available, as well as the slides after the webinar. During the webinar, we do have a relatively small group here today, and we'd really love to have your interaction and participation. It's probably easiest for us to do that using the chat function. So I think the presenters today will be asking you some questions. We'd love it if you would chat with us using the chat at it's either at the bottom or the top of your screen, depending on your layout. And I just want to let you know that there's an option within the chat function about who can see your posts. So if you only want the panelists to see it, that would be the presenters, myself. I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Ann Murphy. If you only want us and our colleague Kati to see your responses, leave it in the default, which is all panelists. But if you want your fellow attendees to also be able to see your chat, you want to click on the drop down next to the two and just change it to panelists and all attendees. So to begin the webinar, I want to introduce our presenters for today. We have three of my colleagues from the department. Michelle Zechner, Dr. Michelle Zechner will be with us, as well as Dawn Reinhardt-Wood and Ken Kinter. So at this point, I am going to turn it over to Michelle to begin the webinar.
Thanks, Anne. We have a couple of things that we're having this conversation about what faculty needs to support students. And anecdotally, I know I've experiencing some challenging things with students in the last few weeks. But in general, we'd like to address some supportive practices for faculty interactions, talk about some student responses to the pandemic, and offer some resources and referrals beyond faculty support. And we do want to hear from you as well. Next slide, please. So let's start by just getting some feedback from you. If you wouldn't mind joining by the chat, which is a button at the bottom, and addressing one or both of these questions. What are some of the challenges you're facing with students right now? So if you just go down to the chat box and type in, it'll code just to us. You can change that to everyone in the room, but I invite you to share anything that you've been dealing with. Yeah, students, thanks, Nee. Students are not able to focus, definitely. I'm having a little bit of problem with that myself. And thanks, Anthony. Juggling all the different demands of life going on. Right, and our students are pretty unique because some of them are already working in the health professions, and I know Dawn is going to talk a little bit more about that, but they are facing some pretty unique challenges with their jobs, their home life, their parenting. And Suni says some students are working with at-risk populations and they experience death around them. Absolutely. Ken and I did another presentation talking to the housing folks who live with patients or persons living with serious mental illness all the time. And those were people who are at very high risk of, and actually some of them had the coronavirus. Also, I see people concerned about graduating students, being concerned about their future, the impact on being able to take their boards, get a job. Yeah, it's really an uncertain time. My undergraduate students are extremely unhappy about graduation, not being live and in person. So I know that's been something. And Ellen says some are calm and some are anxious. So yeah, it is a little bit of a diverse thing. Low on motivation and little contributions to class. I've seen that as well. It's really hard. I've noticed I had to be a lot more motivating to get people to turn in their assignments, and a little bit of a cheerleader, like, you can do it, guys. We're in the last week. You can do this. And Nora's saying some students are frustrated by the interruption of their clinical education. Absolutely. Well, thank you very much, everyone, for giving us some of the things that you're seeing with your students. And I welcome if anyone would like to jot down a phrase or something or two of what you hope to get out of the presentation today in chat. We welcome that as well, so that we make sure that we're covering what you're interested in. And all right, so let's go on. I'm from the Midwest, many of you know. I grew up in the Midwest, and there are a lot of tornadoes there. And so I thought about the last month and a half as being like a tornado, because what happens is the sky gets dark, suddenly you get a tornado flip through your town or whatever, and in the path of the tornado, everything is completely changed, but yet all around it, it may look completely normal, and it may have a very narrow path. So I think about this whole experience as a tornado, because it's really changed all of our lives very dramatically in some ways, and in other ways, not a whole lot. For example, telecommuting. I mean, I know that some of us already telecommute, and some of us, this is a new experience to be at home working all the time. Also, online teaching has been a big challenge and difficulty for some of us. I've taught online before, but I've experienced even more difficulty with motivation, as someone mentioned, and navigating the new platforms of Canvas, Zoom, and WebEx. I've had to sort of navigate all of those within weeks and not really know very well how they work, and trying to navigate teaching the material, but also grading in that way. And the regular routines that we all have, being at home with family to care for, with less social supports, less supports than we normally have in our life, and worry. I think that our students are worried, and we're probably also worried about our personal health, our family's health, our finances, and our safety. So this is really hit on a number of levels. And then P.S., I sort of was thinking about Dorothy and the Wizard of Oz, obviously, but I was thinking about teaching scholarly activities, manuscripts, grading, grants, oh my, because I don't know, certainly my experience is that I'm doing all of these normal stuff that I'm doing with teaching, but I'm also writing manuscripts, I'm submitting grants, and I'm trying to keep up basically with the rest of my academic life. So next slide.
Hi, everyone. So as someone like me who provides disaster response services to the community and also as a primer for our discussion, I think it's really important that we recognize that we all have the potential to react to public health emergencies. I'm sure that if we ask any of you, you could probably identify something in one of these 4 categories that you've experienced since the onset of this pandemic. So these types of reactions typically fit into the 4 categories that you see here on this graphic, which are physical responses, emotional responses, behavioral, and cognitive responses. So I wanted to take a little bit of a look at what that looks like for us, and then we'll go into how this manifests with the student experience. And from what I heard from some of you who, gave us some feedback on what you've seen with your students thus far, I want you to keep those responses in mind as we go through this so we could look at what might be the underlying reasons why you're seeing these behaviors manifest in the classroom or virtual classroom. So in public health emergencies, in the physical category, it's not atypical for people to develop headaches, fatigue, increased heart rate, hypertension even. So, for individuals who may not even have a pre-existing condition of hypertension, increased blood pressure, and change in appetite, unexplained aches and pains, sleep disturbances, and gastrointestinal issues. Sounds a lot like anxiety responses, right? So these are normal responses that we have to such stressors. In the emotional category, people may be feeling distrust, fear, anger, maybe blame, right? How did this happen? Blaming somebody else. Sadness, increased overall stress, and irritability. So if you're becoming irritable with your housemates, your roommates, the people you share your space with, this is not atypical. Behavioral responses can include avoiding others. So think about those students that we have who may pull back in the classroom environment at this time. Substance use increases or the onset of new substance use. Excessive cleaning and washing. We all have to be a little bit more vigilant in terms of hand washing, proper coughing techniques, right? But we may kind of go into overdrive with this. And again, that this is a normal response. And being overly cautious when interacting with others outside of our safety zone, which may be our home, our apartment, and other environments that we occupy. And finally, cognitive disturbances. So individuals will likely have trouble concentrating, problems at work or school, memory issues, troubling intrusive thoughts, and concerns about health that may seem to be consuming them from time to time. And all the concerns about health specific to the event, I should say. So again, all these reactions are normal responses to a public health emergency, and typically they're temporary, right? So they may last for the duration of the emergency. They may last, for a brief period of time during the emergency. But the one thing that's important to keep in mind is that usually these responses resolve on their own. Or, as we practice self-care, get more information about the event, they tend to resolve. However, the longer the duration of the event, the more likely individuals are to experience the onset of these reactions. So that's a unique challenge to this type of disaster, is that at this point in time, there is not an end point in sight for us, right? We may have projections that we receive from the news or from our officials, our government officials, but again, no one can point to an exact time when this pandemic will end. So this stressor is present for this prolonged period of time. and can contribute to more of these reactions in ourselves and our students. Next slide, please. So what does this look like with our students? I think that several of you have already articulated what you're seeing in the classroom. So think about those typical responses that I just reviewed and connect that to what you're seeing in the classroom. So in terms of people behaviorally pulling back from others, we might see a reduction in student interaction, even in a remote environment. So they may limit their interaction with fellow students and faculty, such as you may see a reduction in participation in discussion posts, or live interaction in a synchronous environment. They may find it hard to focus on schoolwork or related academic tasks due to preoccupation with the events that are going on right now and their own personal responses or reactions to the event. This may result in incomplete, missing, late work, or just a poor submitted work. So the level of performance is reduced. So the students who may have typically done well on written assignments, maybe we see a reduction in their performance because of distraction and preoccupation. I think others may have discussed earlier about how many of our students in our school work in healthcare professions, are working with vulnerable populations, may already have families. So we can't discount how torn our students may feel between attending to those other commitments external to the academic environment and also staying connected to school and continuing to perform at the level that they were previous to the onset of this event. So if they're working in healthcare, they may now be working many more hours. We know that many nurses are working double shifts, EMTs are in demand, and then also people who engage in volunteer services like mobile medical reserve corps. They may be volunteering more, so they really do have stress on their time. And unfortunately, for individuals who may currently experience or who have experienced a psychiatric condition in the past, they may see an increase or a recurrence in that condition or an increase in the symptomology, right? So somebody who perhaps was diagnosed previously with PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, or depression, or an anxiety disorder may see a recurrence of that disorder or an increase in symptoms due to these stressors. And finally, I think we can't discount the amount of grief that many of our students may be experiencing or are anticipating during this event. So students may be grieving just the loss of the normal college experience, right? Imagine that this is a first-year college student and all of a sudden their experience has been disrupted, right? And absolutely for individuals who are expecting to graduate this year, they're experiencing a loss of this experience and a loss of those milestone events that we all look forward to as students, as parents to celebrate our students, as teachers to celebrate our students. We're all experiencing this loss. Next slide, please. So we did earlier elicit some responses from all of you about what your students have experiencing. Is there anything else that they've been experiencing now that you have seen what these normal responses and reactions are? Have you noticed students experiencing any of these other reactions that are manifesting in the classroom? Are they reaching out to you more? Do you find yourselves having to reach out to them more to inspire, like as Michelle said, to motivate them to get assignments in on time or participate? Anything else that you guys are seeing? Hearing none, we'll move to the next slide. Oh, Nora says, difficulty focusing Needs lots of reminders. Yes, absolutely. So remember, you know, memory problems are one of those reactions that we may have. It's associated with anxiety, right? And so people really do, you know, need more reminders these days. So encouraging your students to keep calendars, you know, to write down assignments, to use good old-fashioned Post-it notes or reminders in their phones could be effective strategies. Anybody else? Absolutely, David. So David says reminders for them to reach out to us. I think we can't express enough that we are here. And we're going to talk about how we can, you know, effectively respond to students and set boundaries around that. But absolutely, like letting them know that we are here for them. And also we might want to reach out to them before they reach out to us, because sometimes when we are distressed, it's very hard for us to reach out, especially if we might be the type of student who's not used to reaching out for help, right? So that might be uncomfortable for us to be in that, or for our students. Sometimes I say us because I am also a student, maybe uncomfortable for us to reach out for help if we're not accustomed to it. Thanks.
And Dawn, may I just jump in for a second about that? And that is that I know it is important to have, I think, important to be proactive. And I know in the classes that I'm teaching, I'm proactively reaching out to students saying, I know this is a difficult time. If you need anything, please reach out. And I think, you know, many of you are probably doing that as well. So Ken, you've got some great hints for us.
Yeah, so far, Michelle described about the numerous stressors that the faculty are going through in addition to, you know, the pre-existing stuff. And Dawn discussed a lot about the emotional state and all the added stress that are going on with students. And if there's one thing that someone who's stressed out really doesn't appreciate, it's dealing with someone else who's really stressed out. And unfortunately, that's coming to our door now, because as part of our role as faculty, we, the stressed out faculty, who are dealing with the stressed out students. So the goal and the intention of what's on this slide is to hopefully provide sort of a structure to take some of the stress out of that. And that's going to be a lot about what we're talking about going forward here. So we get this 4-step process: listen, validate, support, and refer. So the first part is listen. And it's one of those things that sounds too simple to say, but it's important. And I heard that in David's comment about even just letting people know that we're there for them. I mean, that's a pretty critical point. So the listening part, we can't change what is happening, but we can hear them out. And that's a blessing and a curse. We can't make all of the problems that they're dealing with go away, certainly the ones that are non-academic, but just the idea of being there, being able to listen, being supportive, being understanding. We really can't, you know, count that out. So the next part of that is validate. So the students are going to be going through varying emotions, and all of those emotions are going to be intense. We have people that are extremely sad, people that are extremely angry, people feel cheated of things that they were expecting. The part of this anticipatory grief of what's going on is just this fear of, what am I going to lose? There's what we lose and then what I'm afraid of. So you're going to catch people at all different points in the grieving process. And all validating is just saying it's okay to feel that way. It's okay to be angry. It's okay to be nervous. It's okay. We're all here to some degree. There's no problem that isn't made worse by someone feeling they're the only person going through it. So as they go through the grief process, all of these different emotions are going to come up. So the support part is, as faculty, how can we help them? Now, as faculty, that means there are going to be some boundaries. We're not going to, you know, automatically become therapists and all that kind of stuff. But how can we help them within our role? How can we help put their minds at ease to a certain degree? And then the fourth part of this is refer, which is, you know, what campus supports are available to the students? What personal supports do they have that they can take advantage of to help them get through this situation? And are there professional supports needed, whether they're already involved and they just need to access them, or whether they may need to access increased help at this time? I can tell you, in my private practice, I've never been busier than I am right now. So there's a lot of people that are accessing supports for the first time because of the unique stressors that they're going through. Next slide, please.
Okay, thank you, Ken. So let's take a look. This is the exciting part of our of our presentation. Let's take a look at a few actual situations that our faculty have found themselves in since the onset of this pandemic. We have three, these are real situations. So at first we called them scenarios, and we realized these aren't scenarios. This is real life on the job experience. So let's take a look at this. For each of these interactions, we'll present the student's communication to the faculty first. And I think we have email and I think text correspondence. And then we'd like to know how you might, and we'll look at, we'll look at the faculty's response to their communication. And we'd also like to know how you might have responded in that situation. And if you have any other additional ideas that you can share with your peers here with us for responding to students and supporting them through these kinds of difficult situations. Next slide, please. So in this first example, during a recent online synchronous course, students were unable to focus. First one, then another, and more students began talking about the concerns about their health, their families, inability to attend graduation, loss of job opportunities. So these are folks who might be graduating soon, and now they're faced with this horrible economy, right? Or working with at-risk populations in the workplace. So this went on in this class for about 15 minutes, and the faculty expressed having difficulty redirecting the students. How would you all respond to that? Or how have you responded to that? If you've had a similar situation. Specifically, what type of, techniques did you use to bring them back around? Great. So Suni said that she always talks about how we're doing before starting class. Right. Ellen says, it's really challenging because you don't want to feel as if you're cutting them off. Great. Yeah, and as Anne typed in the chat box, if you'd rather comment by speaking, if that's easier, and we would love it as well, you can raise your hand and we'll unmute you. Great. So I really like the idea of touching base before you commence actual lecture, you commence your class, and checking in with everyone. Especially, it's probably good protocol, always, but especially during this time. Great.
And can I just provide some feedback? That was a true example. And the faculty person basically decided to have a process group. They felt comfortable leading it and really just sort of went through letting everyone speak about how they were doing, what were some next steps, and how to move forward, so that it just became part of the course, the class for that session. So.
Yeah, if I could jump in, I had a similar experience with this. I was teaching in the fall of 2001 when 9/11 happened, and our first class back really wasn't a class. I just came in and sat down and said, well, are we going to go over chapter 3, or are we going to talk about what's going on? And most of the class was actually dedicated to people's feelings and what was going on. And then in subsequent classes, we still had to do that introductory, like 15, 20 minutes of just checking in, and then we could go into the course material again. Now, the difference was that was sort of a one-time incident, and this is something that's more ongoing, so I don't see them as being exactly the same. But it was the better part of a class. One class turned into a process group, and that was what they needed to do. And the students basically chose, look, we'll do the schoolwork on our own, and if we have any questions, we'll reach out to you. And that seemed to be a better way to do it.
Okay.
Yeah, 100%. You can't make every class into that. It ended up being scaled back a little bit as it went, but that's difficult because it's hitting different people in different ways at different times. This is an ongoing thing. So
one technique that could be used, and I'm not saying that you have to, but this comes to mind as we're talking about that. For those of you, so in the psych rehab department, you're probably really familiar with the term, doing a round in a group situation. So even just setting it at 5-10 minutes, let's do a round of all the students just to check in. And if anybody doesn't want to, they don't have to participate, but you're setting some constraints on the time, right? But you're also allowing people to speak if they need to speak and get something off their chest before class officially begins. So thank you, Ken. Thank you, Michelle. Okay, next slide, please. All right, so we have another example, and this slide illustrates an actual email received by Dr. Zechner, and it starts, "Hello, I hope you are well. I just wanted to touch base on my current situation. My father tested positive today for COVID, and he's been sick for the past 3 weeks. I'm the only one caring for him at the moment, and I want to let you know because things have been getting more difficult in handling my schoolwork and my full-time job. I've tried up to this day to hand in everything on time, but I feel very overwhelmed, and I wanted to reach out and apologize if any of my assignments are in late. I will try my best, or I will try the best of my ability to hand in everything on time. Thank you." Next slide, please.
So this was an email to me from a student who was probably one of the best students in my class. And I've had her in multiple classes, and she'd asked me for a letter of recommendation. So it was very hard to receive. So my response to her by email was, "I appreciate your email. I'm so very sorry to hear that your father is ill. I know this must be a very difficult time for you. Please do what you can, and I will not take any points off for late submissions. I will keep your father in my thoughts during this time."
So getting back to that process that we talked about a few slides ago. So where can you see, was Michelle listening to this? Can you see evidence that she heard what the person said? And you can see that in there. You can see where she acknowledged what she heard. Oh, Nora raised her hand.
Anne, can you unmute Nora?
Sorry, I didn't mean to raise my hand.
Oh.
Welcome to the conversation.
Hey, Nora. So what I was looking for in here was just these elements. So was the listening part there? Did Michelle hear what this student was saying? And the answer is clearly yes. And then from the validate standpoint, was there validation? Did Michelle put out, it's okay to feel the way that you feel under these current circumstances? And the answer to that is yes. You can see that element there. And then the support. As faculty, where is the support? So you see those pieces there. And the refer part, that might come along later. This was a first contact about this, and this may be the beginning of a process. Obviously, hopefully everything goes okay, and it doesn't have to go any further than that. But the student knows that Michelle is there, as needed, going through the rest of this process.
Could I just add one thing, Ken? I think it's really important that, that listen piece, and we're talking about, text correspondence or email correspondence. So something can be lost in that communication process in terms of the nonverbals that we offer people, and you know, reciting back to them what we heard, you know, reflective listening. So I think it's really important that we do confirm what the person is telling us in the email. So specifically, Michelle mentions the illness that the father is experiencing. And I think that that's important that we reflect that back in text as we would verbally, you know, in a typical environment. Thank you. Next slide, please. So in responding to students when they reach out to us, or anybody who is reaching out to us with distressing news or seeking assistance, it's really important that we check our own pulse first, right? So are we in a place that we are going to respond best? Are we going to be able to give our students the best response if we respond right now? Maybe, maybe not. So it's really important, as Ken said, to make sure we're not also transmitting anxiety that we may be feeling to that person reaching out for us. So it's important that we look at some of our basics, right? Are we in a good place right now? Are we feeling hungry? Are we really, really tired? Is it 10 o'clock at night when we got this text and we're starting to take things down for the night, right? Maybe we don't have to necessarily react in that moment. Is this information that is potentially going to trigger something within us? Is this something that we have our own anxieties around? Have we suffered a loss lately, or are we experiencing illness in our family? And again, are we able to dedicate the appropriate time and attention to this response right now so that it's going to be received as a supportive message from the faculty to the student? Or could we increase their anxiety if we're not responding when we are feeling well, right? So we're going to talk a little bit later about Michelle's experience in responding to the students, and maybe what she did to ensure that she responded in a way that was supportive rather than increasing anxiety.
And Dawn, I do want to interrupt. I note that Ellen asked a question. If a student is taking multiple classes at a time, should the student be directed? And I think that people are kind of weighing in on that conversation. Yeah, so there's an interesting conversation taking place there. I think students should be directed to let other faculty know. The challenge with that also is without breaching confidentiality of the student, because as faculty, sometimes we have, you know, those water cooler conversations, and to encourage the students to share their challenges with all of their instructors is really important. It's actually one of the things that they tell you to do in the supported education strategies for people struggling with mental health issues. Next slide, please.
So we have one final example, and I want to say that this is not a text from the student who also emailed Michelle, to notify her that her father was sick or his father was sick. This is a different student altogether. So Dr. Z received a text saying, I am so-and-so from your class, and I just want you to know that my father passed away on Saturday due to complications from coronavirus, and his heart stopped. I'm completely devastated and broken. I don't know what is going to happen. I'm having a really rough time accepting the death of my father. I will try to give you a call this week. Wow, that's a heavy text to receive. A heavy text.
Yeah, it was pretty, it was pretty shocking.
Next slide, please. This is Michelle's response. Or let me ask, how would using our techniques that we discussed, what do you think is one of the core ingredients to convey to this student? And then we'll take a look at Michelle's response.
Or maybe you've experienced this
Yeah.
situation.
And compassion and empathy, right?
Mhm.
That listen, validate, and support rolled into two
Mm-hmm.
words.
Mhm.
Yep.
Great. Okay. Could we bring in the response?
Yeah, and I don't know that this was the best response. Oh, okay. And Dave says, "Don't worry about anything course related." Yeah, it really kind of took me aback because this came in at about 9 p.m. And so I was also a little. I've never had to communicate anything of this magnitude by text, so I'm just old school like that. So I was a little uncomfortable with that, honestly, but I did my best. I thought I needed to listen and let the student know that I received the text. So I said, "Hi, I'm so very sorry to hear about your father. I appreciate you letting me know. And when you're ready, reach out and we could talk about the course. My thoughts are with you and your family during this very sad time."
So let's take a look at this again. So the listening part of it, did Michelle get, the message that was sent out to her? And the answer, of course, is yes. Validating, very sorry to hear about the father. And again, the student used some pretty powerful words in describing how they felt and where they were at this time. And the other part that I liked about this is the support part of it, which is when you're ready, reach out. There's a lot going on for that person right now, and school is a priority, but it's a priority among many. So it's a particularly, I thought a powerful part of that message was, look, you need to do what you need to do, and then let's talk about what's going on with school. Not to worry about anything course related, right? So I want to step back. I just wanted to jump back for a second first, because I wanted to get back to Anthony's comment. So Michelle, you get this text at 9 o'clock at night. What was the decision-making process about? Do I do this now, or do I put this off to the morning?
I was kind of stunned, and I felt like it needed a quick response, and maybe that was my own anxiety. And as Dave points out, I didn't do a great job validating the student's distress. Yeah, absolutely.
And again, we're kind of doing the armchair quarterback thing here, coming after what was a very powerful and very distressing thing to hear. But again, I think the power in this is something that really happened, and I'm guessing that some of our colleagues have already had to deal with something like this, and there may be more of us that do have to deal with something like this going forward. So the one option is, okay, so what the 9 p.m., and I'm not second guessing this, no one wants to be in this situation, but the doing it right in the moment, as opposed to, well, I'm going to let this go for about 12 hours and then make a response that I've thought more about. That's a decision. And I think the primary decision is, what sort of frame of mind are you in right in that point of time? Are you okay in that moment in time? Or, hey, if it's 9 o'clock at night and I'm half passed out on the couch, this is not the best time for me to be responding to something like this. So it's a judgment call, but I think the primary piece of this, at least in my opinion, is, where are you at in that given point in time? Do you feel like you're effective at that point in time, and that the haste of your response will actually help with its effectiveness? So I see another good issue about here. So Michelle, you've had a little time to think about it. Is there something that you would say differently, or something you would change about this based on the time that's passed?
I think the point about validation is really good, and I know how to validate, and I could use my words in that way. So I think that maybe taking a little more time to think out a response and let myself process it probably would have been a better idea.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because that's a lot to take in a short period of time, and on top of whatever pre-existing stress is already going on the day. All of the you're in your part of the tornado as well as the rest of us. So I think that's a good point. Any other feedback about that? And again, I want to thank Michelle for putting herself out there. This is a real situation, and we're all looking at it and critiquing it. But I think there's an important lesson in it. And Anthony nailed it. What perfect response? There is no perfect response. We just do the best that we can in the moment. And I think that's an important part to remember under the listen part of this. A, we can't make this go away. There is no perfect response. I mean, I think those are the two summary things. We do the best with what we can do. And again, hopefully this is the beginning of a dialogue. This isn't just we're looking at one piece of this, but this is the beginning of a contact, and you just want to put that out there. That, I think David's point before, I'm here for you. You know, I'm on your side in this. Change slide, please. So speaking to that, you know, when we talked about this process of, you know, the whole listen, validate, support, and refer, a big part of this just going in the door is this self-care piece. As Michelle mentioned earlier on, a lot of people had to change how they teach and what they do in midstream this semester, which was very stressful. And home became the office for many of us all at one time. And we had to do this shift in real time in the middle of teaching classes. So I just wanted to point out some of these elements that regarding how to do this self-care piece, because I think that check-in when something first happens is really critical. And to be honest with ourselves, I'm ready to do this now. I'm not ready to do this now. So acknowledging where we're at, I think, is sort of job one. How are we doing regarding our own thinking? Are we sort of dealing in the worst case scenario of all this, or are we caught somewhere between that and pretending that nothing's happening? One is just being able to focus on where we're at in that moment, just being able to take a breath. I can tell you that I've been doing my best thinking in the last 7 weeks while walking the dog. That's like where most of my good processing happens. I'm away from everything and I can think. So the dog's been incredibly helpful. Letting go of what can't be controlled. We don't have good news to give the students about when this ends. Are they walking? When are they walking? How does this all go? We're all making this up as we go along, and we create a lot of stress for ourselves by trying to control things that we have literally no control over. All we can do is take the breath and just say, okay, we're okay in the moment, we're here, and we're going to take the next steps as they come up. And a really critical piece is compassion. Compassion and suffering don't sit so well together. The more we're suffering, the more difficult time we have being compassionate for others. And compassion is not just for others, but it's also self-compassion. We got to be reasonable to ourselves. I'm guessing that a lot of us are putting a lot of pressure on ourselves to perform and excel and do marvelous things while we're under these really terrible circumstances. We're trying to get by. We're trying to do what we do and maintain the best we can until we get out of this extended crisis mode. A lot of us are under additional pressure, and everybody's anxiety shows up in different ways. I think it's really critical to know how do I act when I'm under stress? And I could tell you one of mine right off the bat is, going back to Michelle's situation, when I'm under a lot of stress and something new comes in, I feel like I have to deal with it right in that moment. And that's usually not a good idea. I need to walk the dog first. Like, I need a little time to think about it and I actually need to get away from it and then come back to it. And then I think a lot more clearly. But everybody has their own different ways. Some of us become much more controlling. Some of us become much more absent. I heard you guys talking about the students who sort of ghost, they kind of step back and they're preoccupied and overwhelmed. And then the other piece about this is just the knowledge that everybody is fighting we were all fighting the difficult battle that we were fighting before this happened. And now we've all gotten this new one on top of that. So that idea of just trying to be a little kinder to ourselves and to others, because we're all operating in this very sort of difficult situation. And I love Anthony's point. We need to give ourselves some grace, cut ourselves a break, as well as others. And what I find is, if we don't do that first part for ourselves, we don't extend it to others. We don't give anybody any slack if we don't give ourselves any. So I think that's a big challenge. Next slide, please.
Thanks, Ken. And I think those are just amazingly important points. We did want to leave you with some practical things that you could use to either help yourself or your students. There's some Rutgers resources. We've put some links here. I just found out about this emotional wellness app called Joyable. I didn't realize you do have to have your insurance card in order to be eligible for that. Also, UBHC has started a telephone support line, and that's for Rutgers faculty, staff, and their family members. We needed to also include the suicide prevention hotline. I think that it's very likely that the risk of suicide will increase because we're all a little more socially isolated than we were, and there's a lot of economic uncertainty, which are both strong indicators of suicide. So you may need to refer someone to that number, or share it with people that you know. A project that I've been involved with someone else, several other folks from COPSA, with Susan Gould Fulgerite has been very pivotal in that, and I've been helping out a little bit, is some wonderful videos for self-care for caregivers. And that project is targeted for caregivers of people with Alzheimer's, but the exercises are wonderful breathing exercises that you could really use anytime, anyone could use anytime. And those are great resources if you just need to stop and breathe for a moment. Also, our students are a little unique in SHP. Where they are going to get resources is through UBHC, the Student Wellness Resources contract. So that's the link for that. Next slide, please. Also, as someone mentioned, I think Anthony already mentioned, that we do have to have some kind of normality in this situation. So we know that students are dealing with extremely challenging situations, and yet we are still required to have grades turned in. And I just wanted to remind everybody, you probably know this already, but at least in SHP today, at the end of the day, I guess, is the deadline for filing an incomplete, in progress, or leave of absence. And an incomplete is really for a didactic course if a student is unable to complete assignments due to COVID factors, or an in progress, that might be more for someone who is in rotation, clinical practicum, or internship. Since many of our students may not be able to reach their number of hours required by May 8th, which is, sort of the grading deadline. Or if someone has an independent study or major project that is being affected by COVID, and in progress might be more appropriate. And Nora, did you want to say something?
This time I raised my hand on purpose.
Go ahead.
So I just want to clarify that, the deadline was sort of a soft deadline around this. And the in progress piece was really about giving a heads up to our registrar, Bianca Thompson-Owen, that you're wanting to give it in progress to either your whole class or some students in that class. And the leave of absence it's not a hard deadline. And the same with the incomplete. You need to put together a contract with a student, but I believe that the actual grades don't have to be submitted until the real grading deadline. I don't know if anybody else wants to comment on that.
And we're not seeing any comments, but thank you for the clarification, Nora. And definitely, if you have a student who is struggling, I've put it out to the students that were the examples that were put forth here about offering incomplete or in progress, because I was concerned that they wouldn't be able to finish their coursework. So if you have a student that's really struggling, you may want to reach out to them and also speak to our registrar's office. And that's for SHP. If you're coming in from another school, you definitely want to touch base with your program director, vice chair, or registrar of your school to sort of understand a little bit more about the guidelines. But those are options available to students that they should definitely consider if they're not able to complete any coursework or much at this point. Next slide, please. We also wanted to share, thank you, Nora, for also sharing this with us. This is another series of resources available for how to help students navigate during COVID-19. And you can see that the space is limited, but you can reach out to this contact person if you would like to attend. Next slide, please. We also wanted to give you just a few, not overwhelming amount of resources, including Zoom exhaustion. I certainly feel a little bit of that myself. I imagine many of us who teach or have meetings are experiencing some of that. Also, I really loved the UMass, that's University of Massachusetts at Amherst, has a wonderful page for their faculty for developing resilience, where they have a lot of interesting ideas, but also some great links to things like I was watching their bird watching link, which was just so peaceful and lovely. So definitely check that out. For more information about mental health and crisis resources, you can go to the Centers for Disease Control. They've got a very nice overview about coronavirus stress and coping with some hints. Also, there's an app for the phones called Shine, and they've got a very nice little packet there and a free app that students might find beneficial. And also there is a New Jersey helpline for anyone who's experiencing mental health concerns, anxiety, depression related to COVID-19, and this is a free service. And then a few more self-care resources, including the COPES videos. I just think they're wonderful. So I guess I put them in twice. I'm sorry about that. Next slide, please. Ken, do you want to talk about these?
Yeah, so in the event, we talked about a little bit about the refer part before, and part of this is, you know, if things do get to the point where it goes beyond what we can handle. Obviously, you know, our primary concern is someone's academic functioning and how they're going to proceed forward. But in the event that this goes beyond that, there are resources available, you know, in case things get to the point where people are in a state of, you know, psychiatric crisis because of all this. So the national hotline is here. There's a crisis text line here. It's probably good to have these resources around. Hopefully you don't need them, but if you do, it's nice to have them right on hand when you need them. And I hope that's something that reduces the, you know, the overall stress level in dealing with this, because as was mentioned before, I think we're going to see an increase in these sorts of things, whether it's with our student body or not. And it's best for us to be prepared for it.
So I'd like to end, I realize we've got 2 minutes. So I wanted to end on a calming note. So if everyone would just join me for a moment, I'm going to walk us through a pause, which is something that we've done, which is from the COPES Institute. So I invite you to join us or just sit quietly for a moment. Sit quietly, stay upright and awake, relax if you'd like. You can even try closing your eyes or letting your eyes soften a little bit. Become aware of the feelings in your body. What do you feel? Notice what it's like to sit. Pay attention to how your clothes feel on your skin. Feel your muscles and joints from the inside of your body. You don't need to change anything, just become aware. Now focus on your breathing. Notice the sensations of your breath coming in and going out. You don't need to change your breath at all. Just be aware of breathing. Make your breath the focus of your attention. Your mind may wander. That's fine. When you notice you're thinking or worrying, just shift your focus back to your breathing. Some people like to say something to themselves as they breathe in or breathe out, like calm or peace, or breathing in, I know that I'm breathing in. Breathing out, I know that I'm breathing out. Before you end this short pause, refocus on how your body feels. Notice your body as a whole. Have any sensations changed? Don't worry about what you're thinking or if you're doing this correctly. Thank yourself for making time to pause. As you move back into your daily activities, take some of your fresh awareness and your appreciation with you. And when you're ready, come back to the room. Thank you, everyone. I really appreciate taking that moment of pause together.
Thank you, Michelle, and thank you, Ken and Dawn. We really appreciate you providing us this webinar today and all of the helpful information and resources. We will be making the slides available to you, as well as a recording of this in case you want to share it with your colleagues or go back to look at those references that were provided. We appreciate everyone's participation today, taking a little bit of time out of what we know is a very busy schedule. And so thank you. Thanks for allowing us to have this time together. And thanks again to the presenters for the wonderful information. Have a good rest of the day. Enjoy the weekend and be well and take good care of yourself. Thank you all.